we've seen shows like this in North America before, How to Catch a Predator.
Right.
We've seen Dateline, NBC Stings. Like, we've seen this sort of thing happen. Some criticism, and I will ask Stinson this when we get to it, but part of this documentary that's has interviewed various police officers and other agencies that actually do this within the boundaries of the current laws as they stand. There's some criticism that in the vigilante justice is putting those situations, people in jeopardy. How do you see this?
Well, I mean, I think it puts a lot of people in jeopardy. I understand the desire for it. It is risky for the people who are conducting the hunt, as it were, in the sense that you really have no control over the situation. You're going after people who you believe to be criminals, albeit not sort of explicitly violent ones, but you're confronting them with allegations of horrific crimes. How a person's going to react to that is anybody's guess. It also puts at risk, of course, the person who shows up at this house. Clearly from the perspective of the filmmakers, they've caught somebody in the act. If they get the wrong person for whatever reason, if there's some sort of miscommunication and somebody else shows up and they're not able to tie those strings together, they've now completely destroyed a person's life with by far the most toxic allegation you can make. And all of this is in the absence of the protections that we would normally have when police become involved in this. Search warrants, the safety that a police officer involves, the oversight of a judge. This becomes a scenario in which really, individuals are, as they say, taking the law into their own hands.
Well, I would suspect that once we get a chance to talk to Stinson Hunter, that he would say they are filling a gap that clearly law enforcement agencies aren't able to fill. And this is a growing problem. Because how many times do we hear story after story, month after month, where our RCMP or various international organizations have come together to bust up a pedophile ring?
So I wouldn't say that law enforcement are unable to fill it. I mean, Mr. Hunter may take that view, but what's happening is law enforcement are almost too able to fill it in the sense that the volume overwhelms law enforcement. It's not that they're not capable of doing it. Certainly all of the legislative and statutory tools are there, and we see sting operations in many respects just like these that police officers become involved in, and they're very successful. The question is, officers are making determinations on the basis of evidence that they know is going to be admissible, first of all, while following, hopefully, the constitutional principles that allow them to collect that evidence, getting judicial authorizations, going after the right people, and using the protections afforded to both sides in the criminal justice system. And so then they also prioritize, based on the limited resources that they have available to them, who are we going after and why. There is a risk, from a law enforcement perspective, that people getting involved in their own vigilantism are actually interfering with ongoing investigations. Sometimes the police will let sort of the small fish go because what they're looking for is the person who makes the video, not the person who views it.
Okay, so I would also throw this out there too, Ed. I think that a lot of people would support
Oh, I have no doubt that people would support vigilantes.
Yeah, I think that they do, because you call it the most toxic of accusations, and I agree with you. I mean, no one ever wants to be put in that sort of position. But the layperson's argument always is, if you're not going to do anything wrong, why are you on these websites in the first place? And if Mr. Hunter's job is to lure them out, and they're coming in unsuspected, of course, they're meeting with this person who they thought is underage, or a child, or a young girl, whatever. Well, these guys have nefarious plans in their minds. So yeah, catch them.
Yeah, look, a lot of it depends on how the sting is constructed, right? And we're relying on lay people to put all of that together. There certainly are, and it's hard to structure, a particular example, but in the infinite world of possibilities, there are certainly possibilities in which the sting operation is constructed in such a way that it snares the wrong person, or it snares multiple people who it ought not to. It snares the person who was viewing on a site that potentially they thought was okay. It turns out to have been child pornography. They engage in a discussion. They show up thinking something else is going to happen, with no intention perhaps of meeting a child. I know Mr. Hunter would say that's not the case. We weed that out. We're careful about our selection process. And that may be true, but it also doesn't afford any of the usual constitutional protections, the search and seizure protections. And from a worst case scenario, I mean, imagine if they succeed in sort of drawing somebody out who's committing these types of offenses, but they do it in such a way that the evidence turns out to not be admissible in court. So they've shamed a pedophile. I guess there's some value in that, but now they can't get a conviction. And maybe that was a person who was already on the radar of legitimate law enforcement. They were going to be conducting that investigation. situation, and they would have been able to make a successful arrest and a successful prosecution. Leave that to the pros, is my view.
Well, one of the things that I think is worth noting that Mr. Hunter and his team, they attempt to, according to this report I have here, gather admissible evidence for the police to act upon, and they have secured a number of convictions for attempting to commit the offense of grooming, and his methods are not entirely dissimilar to those used by covert police officers.
Yeah, and so, I mean, clearly the design of the show, as it were, is to say we will mimic what police officers do, and their goal clearly is to facilitate prosecution. I think shaming is only part of it, and sometimes they may succeed, sometimes they may not. I just question, even from a legal perspective, at the end of the day, it's one thing where we admit on the off chance scenarios where a person happens to come across evidence that's relevant in a criminal proceeding. When a person sort of turns themselves into self-appointed sheriff and cop and goes out and starts doing this for a living, because this is now a documentary that airs on television, there are profits to be made, it's a form of entertainment, for lack of a better word, I start to wonder where they've crossed the line into sort of self-professed police officer, and there are interesting legal questions about whether that makes what otherwise would have been admissible something inadmissible. I know this has been experimented with in the UK. I'm not familiar with these types of tapes being admitted in Canadian law. I could foresee that they might be, but I could also foresee problems.
Okay, Ed, appreciate you unpacking this for us. It's a fascinating story.
Indeed.
Thanks.